Hello, this is Dr. Lavoria Williams, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you all clinical trial diversity matters. So let's begin our discussion with a definition of what is a clinical trial. So basically, a clinical trial is a type of research that tests new medical approaches. Keep in mind that clinical trials come in many different forms. It can be a new screening test, a new drug to prevent a condition or prevent a side effect, or it could be a new intervention, a new medication, or even a new vaccine. Now, it's for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to focus within the context of medication clinical trials. Now, it's also important to know that no matter what kind of clinical trial it is, that all clinical trials require institutional review board approval. And what that means is that before the research can start, that the scientists must undergo a rigorous review by the IRB before they can begin. The scientist has to present the IRB with a detailed explanation of how the trial will be conducted, and they must emphasize how the participants will be protected and monitored throughout all aspects of the trial. So when it comes to clinical trial phases, generally speaking, clinical trials are in 4 phases, but really there are 5 phases. Phase 0 is done in the laboratory with cells or with animals. No humans are included, and it's the longest phase of a clinical trial. Phase 1 asks the big question of, is this medicine safe? Small numbers of people are enrolled, about 20 to 80 people. Then it moves to phase 2. Phase 2, the big question is this medicine effective? More people are enrolled. Every participant receives the medicine. And then phase 3, the big question is, does the medicine work better than what's currently available? Hundreds of people are enrolled, and the difference between phase 2 and phase 3 is that in phase 3 trials, the participants are randomized, very similar to the flip of a coin, to different groups. One group receives the medication, the other group receives the placebo and the current medication that's typically used to treat the condition. In phase 4, the big question is, what else do we need to learn about this medicine over the long term? Tens of thousands of people are enrolled. The medication is in current use, but what the scientist is trying to learn is there something else that we can learn about how this medication works or how it affects people over the long term? Now, the problem with clinical trials is that although Black Americans are 13% of the United States population, they only represent about 5% of the participants in clinical trials. Now, you might ask, well, why is that a problem? Well, the problem is that Black Americans experience a disproportionate rate of health disparities. To mention a few, cancer. Cancer death rates are higher among Black men and among Black women. Black Americans are twice as likely than white Americans to develop Alzheimer's disease, nearly twice as likely to develop type 2 diabetes. Keep in mind that there's no inherent biological explanations for health disparities. Race is a social construct. We know from Psalms 139 that God makes no junk. All of us are fearfully and wonderfully made. So biologically, there are no differences in how God made us. However, there are differences in our backgrounds, such as our ancestry, our age, our gender, our weight, our medical conditions, environmental exposures, such as tobacco use, exposure to pollutants. And those exposures or those backgrounds can affect how people respond to the same medication, vaccine, or even treatment. Now, most new drugs are primarily tested on white men. Now, the limitation of that is not that white men are different, it's just that white men, unlike other subgroups, have higher clinical trial participation rates than others, such as women, people of color, and children. Now, the problem with that is that clinical trial participants should reflect the diversity of the population, and it's especially important that participants from populations that suffer disproportionately from the study condition are included in the clinical trial. Now, there's several reasons why that's not so. There are barriers to clinical trial enrollment. One barrier is study design. Sometimes the way the study is designed, certain people are excluded based on their medical condition, such as diabetes. Sometimes there's a lack of access to clinical trials. For example, people of color are more likely to receive cancer care at a community hospital. NCI designated cancer centers such as Markey offer more trials than community hospitals. So to receive a trial, patients who receive care at a community hospital may have to travel to a larger NCI designated cancer center. And sometimes that's a barrier for people. We know that there's a distrust regarding research among people of color. And that's because of historical atrocities. Health literacy is also a barrier where that there are people who simply don't understand what's involved in a clinical trial. So they just refuse to participate. And then awareness about clinical trial. Unfortunately, research shows us that people of color are oftentimes just not asked to participate in clinical trials. Now, why is that? One reason why that is biases. Sometimes scientists will believe that Black people mistrust research. And although there is some truth in that, it doesn't mean that all Black people feel that way. Sometimes the scientists might not invite a person of color to participate because they feel that the person may have difficulties in participating, that participating in the trial might even be a burden to the individual. There are some things that we need to dispel, some myths about clinical trials. One is that if I'm involved in a clinical trial, I'm going to be treated like a guinea pig. That's simply not true. Clinical trial participants should be fully informed of all aspects of the trial, and they should be treated with respect and dignity. Another myth is that clinical trials are only offered when there's no other help for the person, meaning that all other medications have failed. There are trials available for every stage of cancer and even trials for cancer prevention. So clinical trials can allow access to medications and treatments that are new and otherwise not available. If I join a clinical trial, I might get a sugar pill instead of a real pill. Yes, placebos are used in clinical trials. However, they're never used alone when there is an available standard treatment. Participants who receive a placebo or a sugar pill will receive the placebo in addition to the medication that is the standard of care for that particular condition. Clinical trials are dangerous because they use untested drugs. Because clinical trials are designed to answer important questions, research does have some level of risk. However, clinical trial participants receive investigational drugs only after that drug has gone through extensive testing, as we discussed before, through several different phases before they are tested on humans. And the safety of all clinical trial participants is a top priority. And even while the trial is ongoing, the researchers are frequently and extensively assessing the drug to make sure it is still safe for participants to continue in the trial. Being in a clinical trial will not help me. That's not necessarily true. As I discussed earlier, A benefit of being in a trial is having the unique opportunity to receive an investigational drug that is not available for patients outside of the trial. And lastly, clinical trials are a huge time commitment. Every study is different. Because clinical trial participants are closely monitored, some trials may require more time commitment. On the other hand, many trials do not require much more time than what normally would be performed while receiving a standard treatment. All of the obligations and time commitments should be explained prior to enrollment in the trial. So why is it important to increase diversity of clinical trials? Representation matters. The people in the clinical trial should be like the people who will eventually use the drug. Clinical trial diversity ensures that the discovery, the treatment, the medication are relevant to all people. When trial participants are all similar, the findings may not apply to, or the findings may not benefit people who are different than the people who were in the trial. Clinical trial diversity increases the likelihood that the medication works for diverse groups of people who may have different medical conditions and environmental exposures than the people who were in the trial. Clinical trial diversity increases the likelihood also that the side effects are similar among people with different medical conditions and environmental exposures. So there are some reasons to participate in a clinical trial. Number one, it can provide access to cutting-edge treatments. There's a satisfaction of helping others. As Christians, we are wanting to be a blessing to other people. And one way that we can do that is to participate in a trial that might help others later, may even help our family members if we can identify better ways of treating conditions that we are disproportionately affected with. It decreases health disparities, and it helps advance science. It helps us learn how to treat patients better. And it helps understand the disease that's under study. So in summary, clinical trial diversity matters. It ensures that the trial participants represent the demographics of the general population. It increases the likelihood that the medication will be effective for all people who may have different demographics, different medical conditions, different environmental exposures. And it also ensures that all populations benefit from novel drug discoveries. And it also engages populations that suffer disparities in being a part of finding the solution. And it allows all to engage in the advancement of scientific discovery. So as always, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. I am happy to be of service to you. You can email me at my email address, and you can follow my research team, the Change Team, on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you so much.